Imagine a city that is already dying. It is the summer of 1666. London is not the gleaming modern metropolis you see today. It is a medieval maze of narrow, twisting streets so dark that sunlight barely touches the cobblestones. The air is thick with the smell of rot, sewage, and fear. For months, a silent killer has been stalking these streets. It isn't an army or a criminal, it is a microscopic bacterium. The Great Plague has the city in a chokehold. Every morning, the silence is broken by the rattle of carts and the chilling cry, "Bring out your dead." The citizens of London are praying for a miracle. They are praying for something, anything, to stop the disease that is wiping out their families. They had no idea that their miracle was coming, but it wouldn't come from a doctor and it wouldn't come from a prayer. It would come in the form of a spark, a wind, and a wall of flame. Today, we are going back to the week London burned to the ground. We are going to witness the inferno that destroyed 13,000 homes and turned the sky red. But we are also going to uncover the incredible, twisted irony of this disaster. How the worst fire in English history actually saved the city from total extinction. To truly understand why the fire mattered, we first have to understand what it was burning. In the mid-17th century, London was a tinderbox. It was a disaster waiting to happen. The architecture itself was the enemy. Most houses were built of timber and pitch, a sticky black tar-like substance used to waterproof roofs. Pitch is highly flammable. These wooden houses were packed so tightly together that people on opposite sides of the street could shake hands from their upper windows. There was no zoning, no safety regulations, just a chaotic sprawl of wood and straw. But the physical danger was nothing compared to the biological one. By 1665 and 1666, London was suffering under the shadow of the bubonic plague. This wasn't the first time the plague had visited. It was a recurring nightmare that had haunted Europe for centuries. But this outbreak was catastrophic. The text tells us that the plague had killed 100,000 English people. To put that in perspective, that was roughly 15 to 20% of the city's population gone. Dead. Whole families were sealed inside their homes with red crosses painted on their doors, marking them as infected. The streets were empty, save for the body collectors. Medical science at the time was helpless. Doctors wore those terrifying beak masks stuffed with herbs, believing the disease was spread by bad air. They tried bloodletting and herbal brews. But as we know now, these treatments had zero effect. They didn't know the true enemy. They didn't know that the death was crawling around their ankles. The disease was carried by fleas living on rats. And in the filthy, cramped, garbage-filled streets of medieval London, rats were everywhere. They lived in the walls, under the floorboards, and in the thatched roofs. The city was essentially a giant wooden breeding ground for the disease. The people were desperate. They believed God was punishing them for their sins. They needed a cleanse. They just didn't realize how extreme that cleanse would be. The clock struck midnight, ushering in Sunday, September 2nd, 1666. The summer had been incredibly hot and dry. A drought had turned the wooden city into bone-dry kindling. In a bakery on Pudding Lane, not far from the London Bridge, a baker named Thomas Farriner went to bed. But he made a fatal mistake. He failed to properly extinguish his oven. A stray spark, perhaps no bigger than a firefly, drifted onto a pile of fuel nearby. Within minutes, the bakery was in flames. Now, fires in London were common. People were used to grabbing buckets and putting them out. But this night was different. A strong gale-force wind was blowing from the east. It grabbed the fire and didn't just spread it, it threw it. The fire jumped from the bakery to the hay in the inn yard next door. Then it jumped to the warehouses on the riverfront. These warehouses were filled with coal, oil, tallow, and alcohol. It was like throwing gasoline on a bonfire. By morning, the fire was a firestorm. The streets were too narrow for fire equipment. The only way to stop a fire this big was to create fire breaks, essentially pulling down houses in the fire's path to starve it of fuel. But the mayor of London hesitated. He was worried about the cost of rebuilding. That hesitation doomed the city. Panic set in. Imagine the scene. thousands of people rushing into the streets carrying their most valuable possessions on their backs. The River Thames became a highway of refugees. People were throwing furniture, clothes, and even musical instruments into the water, trying to save them or fleeing on boats. The sky turned a bruised purple and red, visible from miles away. The roar of the fire was said to be like the sound of 1,000 thunderstorms. For 3 days, the fire raged. Monday and Tuesday were apocalyptic. The heat was so intense that it created its own weather patterns. The most dramatic moment came when the fire reached St. Paul's Cathedral. This was the spiritual heart of the city. People had put their goods inside the massive stone church, believing the thick walls and God's protection would save them. They were wrong. St. Paul's was undergoing scaffolding work, wood. The roof was made of lead. The fire caught the scaffolding, climbed the walls, and melted the roof. Witnesses described a river of molten lead pouring down the streets like lava, glowing red in the night. The stones exploded from the heat. The great cathedral fell. By the time the strong winds finally died down on Wednesday, the devastation was absolute. The fire had consumed 13,200 houses, 87 parish churches, and the Royal Exchange. 4/5 of the city was gone. It was a smoking wasteland of ash and charcoal. The citizens looked out over the ruins of their capital, believing they had lost everything. They thought this was the end of London, but as the smoke cleared and the rebuilding began, the survivors started to notice something strange. The weekly bills of mortality, the lists of dead, changed. Before the fire, the lists were dominated by plague victims. After the fire, the plague numbers plummeted. This is the incredible paradox mentioned in our documents. When a huge fire destroyed much of London in 1666, it wasn't all bad. The text explicitly states, the flames put an end to the recent plague that had killed 100,000 English people. How? It was a brutal form of sterilization. The fire had been so hot and so pervasive that it had incinerated the filth of the city. It burned the garbage in the streets. It burned the wooden floorboards where the rats nested. It burned the thatched roofs where the fleas bred. The rats and fleas, the carriers of the bacteria, were wiped out by the millions. The fire effectively sterilized the heart of London. It destroyed the habitat of the disease. Without the crowded, filthy wooden housing, the rats couldn't return in the same numbers. The fire also forced a change in architecture. When London was rebuilt, King Charles II demanded wider streets. Wood and thatch were banned. Houses had to be built of brick and stone. This new, cleaner, more open city was far less hospitable to the plague. The Great Fire of London was a tragedy, yes. People lost their homes, their businesses, and their history. But in a strange twist of fate, the fire likely saved more lives than it took. If the plague had continued to rage unchecked through the winter of 1666, the death toll could have doubled. Instead, the fire acted as a cauterization of a wound. It burned away the infection so the city could heal. London rose from the ashes not as the medieval wooden trap it had been, but as the foundation of the modern global city we know today. It serves as a powerful reminder that sometimes, in history as in life, our darkest moments can pave the way for our greatest renewals. What do you think? Was the fire a tragic accident or a necessary reset for a dying city? Let us know in the comments below. And if you want to see more stories where history takes an unexpected turn, make sure to like and subscribe to the 11th Archive.